Hi, I'm Jim Knotts, President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Welcome to today's virtual reading of the names. 2022 marks the 40th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. As part of our commemoration, we'll host an in-person reading of the names at the wall from November 7th through 10th, 2022, when all 58,281 names on the wall will be read aloud. In the lead up to that event, we'll be reading names each day online while sharing the photos of these heroes. For our daily virtual reading, the names of the service members will be read by month and day of death between the years 1956 and 1975 in alphabetical order for the given day. We apologize in advance for any mispronunciations. Know that our readers are doing their best to honor these service members. We hope you'll listen and watch each day and share with others as we remember and honor those who gave their lives during the Vietnam War.
William Capena Alameda, Michael Peter Alongi Jr., Louis Elton Armstead, Edward Paul Austin, Elton Eugene Baker, Wayne Ashley Bulmer, Howard Lynn Bartley, Thomas Wiley Bayonet, Edward Allen Balefus Jr., Arthur Burton Bengen, Michael E. Bennett, Walter Earl Bentley, Jesus Rojas Bermudez, Edwin Ellis Blagden, Leslie Von Bowman, Woodrow Wilson Bradley, Jr., Albert Brio, Jr., Stanley Alton Brown, Richard Pearlie Buber, John B. Burgess, Leroy Burks, Jr., Luther William Burton, Jimmy Joe Butler, Charles N. Carson, Jr., Jackie Charles Carter, Thurl Guy Carter III, Richard Cortez Cartwright, Edwin Harry Case, Norman Jean Cates, Wilfredo Cintron Mendez, James Michael Chapinski, Charles Chapman Clark, Oliver Coleman Jr., Ernest Frizzle Cook Jr., Ronald Joseph Constantino, Lawrence R. Costello, Charles Gray Costin, Dwayne Lee Cote, Michael Brendan Coonahan, Ronnie Courtney, Morel Joseph Crary, Kent Allen Cunningham, Chester Donald Dale, Theodore Hubert Dalton, Charles F. Danielson, Jr., Gary Leonard Dock, Richard Glenn Davis, Charles R. Davis, Jr., Michael Andre R. Demagnin, Oliver Evans Deal, Jr., Woody Jr. Dean, David Rudolph Dickens, Dennis Ray Deball, Marion Leon Draper, Keith William Duffy, Thomas David Duncan, Timothy Charles Dunning, Larry David Dupree, Richard John Edris, Alan Thomas Elder, Jr., Philip James Enlow, Nicholas Ben Enriquez, David Gleason Fell, Thomas Paul Frank,
Ronald Albert Fromm, Thomas George Funk, William Garcia, Gary Lynn Gascon, Albert Lummis Gay Jr., James Eddie Graves, Edward Lee Gustafson, John Robert Haygood, David Lee Hall, Gerald Eugene Booth Ham, Thomas Joseph Hanley, Neil Ronald Hans, Daniel David Hardin, Dayton Leo Hare, Jr., Stanley Moore Harrell, Rodney Carswell Harris, Jimmy Ken Harrison, Eric Thomas Harshbarger, Edward Earl Harson, Jr., Don Albert Hawkins, Gregory Lynn Hagen, Michael Lynn Hino, Andrew Herman Hodge, Michael Gordon Hoff, James Lee Holcomb, Timothy Holster, James Hoover, Michael Mervyn Horner, Floyd W. Hotaling III, James J. Howard, Keith Vincent Huffstutler, Gordon Samuel Huggins, Aristoteles del R. Ibanez, Daniel John Illey, Gerald Allen Iverson, Willie Lee James, Michael Douglas Jacqua, John Ernest Johnson, Robert Irvin Johnson, Joshua Thomas Jones, Paul David Jose, Samuel Kaulahaimai Kahana, Charles Edward Collar, Judd Wayne Kennedy, Harry John Kenny, Elmer Marvin Keevil, John Francis Knopf, George C. Kosovich, Jr., George Edward Kotian, Wayne Kevin Lane, Donald K. Lakey, Robert Wilbur Larison, Joel Thomas Lau, Jerry Smith Leonard, Richard Walter Little, Joseph Paul McCulloch, Jose Maldonado, Sam Henry Mangum, James Emmett Martin, Daniel Teofilio Martinez, Walter Lawrence Maurer, Eason Jasper Maxey, Wendell D. McBurrows, William G. Mendenhall,
John David Michaelis, Moses Mickle, Alan Arlen Milk, Bertman Earl Miller, Joseph Anthony Miller, Jr., Thomas Michael Moore, William John Morrison, Fred Arthur Nelson, Lonnie Pitts Newland, Gerald W. Nicholson, Jr., Frank Ray No, Dennis Kenneth O'Connor, Ronald Thomas O'Keefe, Louis Milton Ogle, Ralph Wheeler Onana, Donald Henry Willett, Roger Dale Partington, Daniel Charles Patterson, Rodney Walter Peters, James Vincent Potcotter, Marvin Norbert Propson, Michael Laverne Pugh, Robert Frederick Quant, Ferdinand Joseph Quattrone, Thomas Stephen Richards, Joseph Earl Rollinger, James Arthur Ross, Carrie Frank Rundle, Peter Ruzela Jr., Carl Francis Reinierson, Reinhard J. Schnurrer Jr., Leo Richard Schoaf, Stephen Dwight Sears, Walter James Seidel, Ronald David Sheffey, Roger Eugene Shepard, Robert Leroy Shuck, Harry Joseph Sickler, William David Sirocco Jr., Kenneth Eugene Slater, Thomas Herbert Smith, Herschel Clifford Smith, Eddie Eugene Spradlin, Michael Howard Stofflet, Gary Lynn Sublette, George Buster Sullins, Jr., Michael John Synod, Arthur Isaiah Thomas, Charles Roy Tipton, Robert James Todd, Anthony Richard Torsivia, David Tucker, John Edward Vandenberg, Jr., Dieter Rudolph Vader, Jose Angel Vasquez, Michael Viewig, Domingo Balance Vinlowan, Johnny Dewey Volrath, Gilbert Earl Wallace, Larry Thomas Waltz, Klaus Warlman, John Jeffrey Weatherby, George Robert Weaver, Jr., Donald Jean Weir, John Harold Welch, John Clyde White III, Thomas Daniel Whitlock, Lester Williams, Jr., Jerry Paul Witt, David Alexander Woods, Randy Blake Wright,